play is all about challenge our thinking to think outside of the box. So introducing elements that should not be part of the workplace, but then make them part of the workplace. In its essence, it's challenging our beliefs of what should be to what can be.
Welcome to the Building Thinkers podcast. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by
Emy.
Emy, thank you for coming on. We just realized right before recording that we were in the same place in Amsterdam at the L&D Shakers Non-Friends. Will you share a bit of your story? What brought you to the amazing things you're doing now?
Yeah, of course, I'd be happy to. I think if I can pinpoint a starting moment of where my story begins relating to what I'm building now, that has to be around high school. And I remember I had this teacher who was teaching English, and she was very into different programs outside of school, extracurricular activities. And she was the one that persuaded me and my friend at the time to join this program called MUN, Model United Nations. And then the next year, she came back to us and said, hey, you were part of this program. How about this program? Which led me to be participant of the European Youth Parliament. So that was such a nice opportunity for me because it allowed me to just get out of my shell. Because up until that moment, I was like this shy person. I wasn't really talking a lot. Public speaking was a big no-no. I remember I had to deliver a speech in that first conference in front of 300 people, and my knees were shaking. I was like, I'm just going to collapse on the stage. But then that I apparently did something right because I was selected to represent my school, let's say, in the international conference. And then that was the beginning of what I'm doing right now, because this organization, this volunteer organization, had this really nice concept called team building. Because the whole essence is that you simulate the works of the European Parliament, right? So you have students going into committees, you discuss important topics like the asylum policy, like the European Commission and the works. And then the organizer said, okay, we want people to discuss these topics, but then these people don't know each other. So how am I supposed to agree and make a consensus with someone I don't even know? And then we can agree on, I don't know, the refugee policy of Europe. So for the first part of the, let's say, AIDS conference, every participant engages in team building. And that's when I discovered the power of play, not only in how a team works, because then after that, people are more likely to trust each other. They're able to communicate and collaborate and solve problems. And then fast forward that a few years later, where I stopped going to this organization, I had to get serious and go to university and do all, serious work and all of that. But I kind of brought it with me, and that influenced my career choices, because then from that moment, I decided that I want to work with people. So that led me to pursuing a career in human resources. And then lately, what I'm trying to build is integrating more play into our work lives, because we have so many untapped benefits, and I wish more people knew about it.
Emy, that's so powerful. I love hearing the different starting points for people in recognizing, for example, here in the power of play. And so people have been, I think, coming around in ways, or maybe it's the circles that I'm in, to understanding the true, like the research behind play, what it allows for. From your perspective, as you think about it, what is it that people tend to overcomplicate about this topic or maybe get wrong? And this might lead us to a sentence stem, if only people knew, when it comes to this topic.
Yeah, of course. I think what I've recently figured out when it comes to play, and then sometimes play is intertwined with the word gamification. People think that gamification is something super complex, right? Like we need to build a specific software, or we need to integrate specific components, and we need to maintain a platform and invest a lot of money so that we can have this game that people can play when they are applying for a job. So there are examples like this, and indeed these solutions can be quite expensive and time consuming. But I think it's the more complicated side of gamification. What I'm advocating for is that there are some gamified interventions that people can use there that are as easy as starting a meeting with an icebreaker. Like, for example, in one of my previous teams, we had this, let's say, habit that we start each meeting with just a very random question that everyone has to answer. And then you can see that people are more eased into the conversation. So instead of going to autopilot, business as usual. Let's go in around weekly and just go around and say what we have been working with. We just get to know each other a bit more, and that creates connections. It fosters trust. It fosters more collaboration between members. If I know you, I tend to like you, and then I tend to want to work with you more. So there's so much untapped potential with just a small question, right? It's so powerful. Then it translates to more and more interventions like team building days, gamified brainstorming activity when you set goals, or introducing gamified activities during onboarding to foster that social collaboration between new members of a team. And it just goes on and on.
Mm.
So I think if we could summarize, if people knew how simple it is to insert gamified, playful elements into work, which can have lasting results.
Thank you for sharing those insights. I think one of the things that it draws me to some curiosity around is sometimes maybe when there's a lack of intentionality, some of these practices can be overused or misused. What would you say to people who are recognizing the power of play and gamification, but aren't really sure where to start because they want to do it well and they want to make sure it's not like, oh, another icebreaker? You know, we've been in those moments where there's not a connection to the content or there's not a purpose. How do you see that? Or can people just try it out? You know, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's just starting simple and doing something that feels comfortable. Because I think, especially in these type of areas, but also in other areas, if you're not comfortable or fully believing into what you're doing, that also translates in how you deliver it. So start simple, start easy, start with what comes natural to you. It doesn't come natural for every person, and every person can gamify, let's say, their processes in a different way. So I think also preparation is key. There are so many resources out there. Like, for example, there's this ice-breaking questions generator that you can just have, and then you just tap, and then it generates a new question every time. So you can use this for your weekly team meetings. And then if you, for example, want to set goals for the new year, right? Like we are at the end of the year now, and we want to set new goals for the upcoming quarter, all or half quarter. Then we can use a gamified activity like putting post-its, playing some music. So it doesn't have to be something more complex. I think people just need to disengage from the idea that it has to be something complicated. I mean, we used to play as kids and it was coming so natural. We didn't have to think about it. Now in a workplace, it just seems that everything is more rigid and it has to follow a certain pattern, which I understand because it's a different element. And of course, there's some resistance and some preconceptions that keep us from acting as children. But I think it's just a matter of preparation, access to resources, starting simple, and then if you want to take it a step further, reaching out to people who can help. I think there are also other professions out there, other people who are doing this specifically, and there are resources of live workshops. Or you can reach out to communities and just ask a question. There are handbooks out there. And then the more you try, the more you practice, the easier it will get.
One of the things that I like to do in this area is look for inspiration in unexpected places. Sometimes I see it in nature, sometimes I see it in a physical board game. I really enjoy creating the visual design that goes along with my learning experiences or activities. And so that often brings me when I'm literally moving things around kind of on the canvas and thinking about a new visual metaphor might come to me that allows for a container for play. And so that's one of the things that I like to think about is just having eyes to see what's around you and maybe looking for inspiration in unexpected places. I'm not sure. Have you seen that to be true in your work as well?
Yeah, of course, of course. I think that's so powerful, and I'm really happy to hear you say it because play is all about challenge our thinking to think outside of the box. So introducing elements that should not be part of the workplace, but then make them part of the workplace. So in its essence, it's challenging our beliefs of what should be to what can be. So I think that is also very inspirational to again look for places, any playful activities that you interact in your daily life and how you can use these elements to bring back into the workplace, into your team. Like, for example, last year I was doing improv and I was super happy to see that some of the techniques that they used to loosen up and get into action and get into the scene was the exact games that I play in my team building days. So if you're part of, let's say, a sports club, or you're playing board games with your friends, or you go to a workshop, make some notes. I think the more open we are to these inspirations, the more we're able to see them.
I love this should be to can be. And it brings me to a note that you wrote in our pre-work about some of the resistance. You recognize people may worry about appearing unprofessional or childish when we're talking about bringing play into work. And so I see a connection point here with what the perceptions of what's expected or what we should do versus the possibilities. What's been your experience with that resistance, and how have you overcome it in the work that you do?
Yeah, I think that the resistance usually comes in the very beginning because people don't know what to expect. And of course, I don't blame them. When it comes to a workplace, the stakes are higher than in an informal setting among friends. So of course, appearances matter because maybe your manager is there or the upper management is present, or you're worried about how professional you are because your position holds some level of authority. So you don't want to lose respect, let's say, among your peers. So these are all valid concerns, and I completely empathize with them. And of course, I also tailor my approach to the setting as well. So not all games are meant to be like, for example, in the organization that I was as a volunteer when I was in high school, we used to play these sing-along games. And of course, I don't think that's fully appropriate for,
It depends
let's
on your
say,
workplace.
exactly. So if the people are recipient to it, I think it goes deeper and deeper to what you can do and what activities you can employ. But I think the resistance is valid, but also can be challenged. So the way that the workplace has been worked so far, I try to turn it around to, okay, you want to work with someone on a specific project, but you don't know what this person is doing in their life and what are their motivations, what makes them tick, how they like to receive feedback. And so all of these can be done with through activities. And then it's much easier to for people to open up when the setting is informal than formal. And I like to bring this example. So if you have, let's say, a workshop on feedback, and then people are trained how to give and receive feedback, then it's something formal, right? So most people would think that maybe, I want to say the right thing because my manager is present. I don't want to say something that maybe people will judge me. Maybe people know more about feedback than I do, so I have to keep up appearances. And then replace that image with a game where, for example, we have to talk about, I have this specific one, that there is a hypothetical scenario that we are all part of a plane wreck and we're in a deserted island. And we have 10 minutes to come up with a consensus of which items we will select out of that burning plane before the plane explodes. And there's a list of, let's say, 20 items, and the team needs to discuss and reach a consensus of 10. What's 10 items to choose? So when this activity is completed, we do a round of feedback. So there, the stakes are super low because it's a hypothetical scenario. What I say and how I will say it doesn't really affect anything because it's not related to my job, at least not directly. So in that sense, people are more open to learn, to make mistakes, to learn from their failures, to reflect, and also they're more open to express themselves how they truly feel. And then after that, when we have completed the circle of the activity, then we make the connections to the real world. So then people can say, oh, so the way that I give feedback to that member, for example, who was talking to us or who were very dominant in the conversation can also be applied to another real world scenario in my work. So this is how the loop is completed. And I think once people have tried it and have seen the effects, or at least know someone who has tried and has seen the effect, then the resistance is a bit lower. But my approach is just start easy and start with something that, as easy as a name game, like what is your name? Tell me about yourself, and then go around the circle and maybe introduce a tennis ball and then we throw it to each other. Still, this is a game, like it's a gamified activity. You wouldn't normally introduce yourself with a tennis ball in your hand, but it's still something that is quite easy for people to follow regardless of how they may think. And then the more time passes, the more people loosen up. So I've seen this happening. It's not like I will just go in there and then ask everybody to sing with me. No, it's an intentional process.
There's a gradual easing in. I was thinking about in this spot where you talked about it's the loop is completed. I think that you've hit on something there that takes us from throwing an icebreaker out there to what you just described in the scenario around feedback. You've taken them to a different scenario, a different simulation that is outside of traditional work. And that created this space, or maybe we'll just say container, if you will, for them to interact and have these experiences where, to your point, they're not thinking about who has more knowledge around feedback or how they're doing it. They're able to engage when you've created that space. And then the key to that loop being completed is the facilitator, the learning experience designer, the planner, whatnot, depending on your role, bringing those connections so that they can take what they experienced and I was going to say land the plane, but now that's in this scenario. This is maybe too ironic. But yeah, they can close the loop, we'll say. It sounds like you took the time to make those connections. What would you say to people that are starting out and maybe that part seems complicated? Like, maybe I can come up with the plane idea, but I'm not sure how to get it back and close the loop.
I think it starts with reverse engineering the process. So what do you want to accomplish? My approach has specific steps, and every step has an intention behind it and a goal. So every activity that I do has a reason why it's being done at the moment that it's being done. Of course, I don't expect that everybody has the same level of knowledge because I have been doing this since I was 16. So I know when to do and what, and I think that takes a lot of time. So that's why I encourage people who are starting to just start easy with something that they are comfortable with and then build up from there. And the way to start is that to start with the objective. What is your goal? Do you want, for example, people to be able to have more fruitful conversations? Do you want people to ideate on something and then have more out of the box thinking? Do you want people to be able to solve problems together as a team? So start from there, start with your objectives, make it as specific, and maybe work with the SMART criteria to also make sure that you have this in check as well. So start with your goal and then work backwards. And then when you choose your intervention, as I call it, you have your goal, you have your intervention, and then to close the loop, you have two more steps. The first step is debriefing. So it's basically feedback, but in a group setting. Everybody can pitch in, and debriefing has 4 elements: facts, feeling, findings, and future. So you ask what happened, how people felt about it during the game or the activity, what are the main findings, what are the takeaways, and then you pass on to the last element of the loop, which is the future. So how they will connect their findings with real world scenarios. And then it's, I think, the skill of the facilitator to make those connections or at least lead the group towards those connections. And then that means that whatever people were doing makes sense. And I think that's also the differentiator between doing this doing these games in a kids environment versus adult environment. Adults want to know why they do what they do. Kids are like, I'm playing, I have fun, that's enough information for me. But then adults want to understand why. So then the facilitator comes in to close the loop and explain, why did we do this game? What did we find out? How can we integrate this to our work?
This idea, whatever people were doing makes sense. I think that is such a key point where we have both been doing this type of work for a long time. And so some of the things I think that we do seem very natural because of that. And so part of in this podcast work, I like to pull those things out. And I think it's so helpful with frameworks and terms. There's many different versions of that, but I love to hear people's different approaches because I do a very similar process. And this is not my episode, so I will not go into all of my process, but there's a lot of alignment in, of course, working with the end in mind to begin with and the objective and thinking about it. And I think another piece of the resistance that sometimes we might experience from people in a session is from bad training, from training where the plane was truly not landed. And it did not make sense why we did the thing with, the sea lion or something, it didn't connect in the end. And so those points are so powerful. So Dr. Stuart Brown is one of the researchers that I've read around play. And I was going back to one of his quotes where he said, "Play is the stick that stirs the drink. It's the basis of all art, games, books, sports, movies, fashion, fun, and wonder. In short, the basis of what we think of as civilization. Play is the vital essence of life. It's what makes life lively." As you think about that and you think about the work that you do and maybe I should stop saying work, the work and play that you do, What resonates to you about that?
I think that how present it is in so many different aspects that we don't really realize. Play has been ingrained in so many areas in our lives, and we don't even realize because it was always this way. And the more we evolve, like we kind of have solidified that ideas are this way, that, kids play and adults work, and then workplaces need to be serious and professional, and we're just there to do serious work. So I think the more these ideas are solidified, the more difficult it becomes to challenge them. And then when someone challenges them, it becomes so revolutionary. But what I like to think about is that the idea that I'm bringing is not revolutionary at all. It's just that something that was always there, but then we have forgotten about it because we respond so well to play in other areas of our life. I don't see why it shouldn't be, just as easy to integrate in our work. Of course, with specific integrations as well. It doesn't have to be that, the work that we do, the play that we do in other environments need to be completely copied and pasted into the workplace. There need to be some adjustments, but it's just a very simple intervention that people can do in order to, make their work lives as lively as well.
That's making me think of the ideas that are maybe at the roots of work are a piece of this resistance as well. If the story we tell ourselves about work is that it needs to be hard, that it needs to be like full of challenge, or that we're clocking in and trudging through, then yeah, we're gonna meet with resistance about play. If we believe that work is about helping others or about human flourishing or about activating human potential, then whatever different tools and strategies and research we can bring to the table to allow that end goal comes in. And if it's also about enjoying the actual art of work, because it makes up a lot of our lives as adults, then maybe we have some more openness to it as well.
Challenging those limiting beliefs of what work should look like, I think it's the first step. For example, we have this saying that, if you have too much fun at work, maybe you don't work at all. Or if people are enjoying each other, or they talk or they laugh, maybe they're just slacking off. So I think just being aware of these beliefs and then challenging them is the first step. And then, of course, it needs to be intentional. I think I also wanted to touch upon something you mentioned before, that just introducing something just because for the sake of it doesn't really make any impact. On the contrary, it creates a more negative effect than it wants to produce. The more intentional we are with introducing gamified activities, and also I think that also comes with experience, that we know when to introduce its intervention and why, but that also experience is complemented with reflection and practice and trial and error. Of course, nobody will get everything right the first time, but I think also spending a bit more time to realize why we do what we do and what do we want to accomplish and what will get us there in a more relaxed and fun way, that can already make a lot of progress.
Emy, when you think about your own life and experience with play, where has been a place where play has helped you unlock your own potential?
It did unlock me when I was doing all of this volunteering, because I believe that, as I said in the beginning, I was very shy and like very introverted. Still, I'm introverted, but I also have found the ways to come alive, let's say, on stage, and to come alive when I engage people playing with me. It really unlocked me in a sense of I saw how people develop. And if I can pinpoint a specific moment where I was like the most aha moment in this journey, I would say, is I was leading a team in one of these simulation conferences, and then we had a committee and we had a topic to discuss. And I had one person in my committee where they were kind of like me, but they were not participating at all. They were so timid. When we started, they didn't want to engage that much in the activities. They didn't want to talk that much, so they were visibly uncomfortable. And then I think the conference lasted 4 days, and that on the end of the fourth day, that person was just going in, participating with everybody, supporting each other, laughing. And I was like, this was pure transformation in 4 days. And I think part of it was because this whole process was so intentional that even if in the most uncomfortable situations, you are eased into it. And then it just is, you find your way through it. And then you find the tools that make you feel more comfortable. So I think that power, and then I think that also inspired me afterwards, that everybody has this potential that you can just activate with just a simple intervention, is just having fun, just smiling. It's so simple and so revolutionary at the same time. So I think that prompted me to just seek this transformation if I can to, and then transmit it to other people.
Where do you specifically see at the intersection of gamification and either onboarding or career development where that is the right, maybe we'll say strategy for right now, or framework to go at? Like, what does gamification unlock specifically within career or onboarding that you've found?
I think onboarding is a good example because it's also a space where a lot of different activities can coexist while also producing positive results for the new members. Something, for example, that I have seen mostly missing in organization nowadays is this social element. So you enter a new organization, so you enter a completely new environment, and then mostly what we see happening is that, okay, you're introduced to your team, you're introduced to the company, you have these workshops around company values and the company history, maybe how the team works, maybe having a lunch with the team. And then, okay, after 3 weeks, 4 weeks, ever long onboarding lasts, okay, go on your own way. Now we expect you to work with everybody and be comfortable with everybody and just, I don't know, make the most out of this
Figure it
work
out.
environment. And then for some people, this might come easy. For other people, it might not. But I think the social element is just so, so, so important. And there are so many studies that have shown how important onboarding is and how it affects employee retention, job satisfaction, and employee satisfaction in general. So I think that the intersection between onboarding and gamification can happen in that social element. So when you introduce people to the team, usually you have a lot of new starters, right? So most companies have these induction days or day or hours, and then everybody's in the same space. Okay, so these people who are on the same boat as you are, let's say, the most immediate, you have to something resembling comfort. You're uncomfortable, I'm uncomfortable, let's be uncomfortable together. That creates comfort. So if you as a facilitator, if you're in the HR department or whoever facilitates onboarding, can make that connection more intentional and say, okay, so you're both feeling uncomfortable. Okay, let's introduce each other. Let's learn more about each other. Let's solve a challenge on the company values. Who can find, I don't know, the most pieces of the puzzle together? And that creates these long lasting relationships that, oh, I have someone that I feel more comfortable in the company, someone who is as new as me, who doesn't have hasn't formed these connections with other people in the company yet, so they can be my support buddy. And usually what we've seen is that there are other interventions, like, for example, having a buddy from your own team or having a mentor within other teams. But what people forget is that these people already have relationships within the organization. They already have friends or colleagues, or they know who to reach out to. But then when you're the newcomer, you're just the outsider. So it takes longer time to form a relationship with an insider than with another outsider. So if companies make onboarding and the social element of onboarding more specifically more intentional with the help of gamification, with challenges, with games, with getting to know each other, spending more time together, then that has a domino effect of, okay, I'm an outsider, I connect with another outsider, I become more of an insider, and that leads, gives me more comfort to reach out to my own team and feel more comfortable in the organization, have a support system around me that is wider than just my own team. Also can even, I would argue that it goes even beyond that. If my fellow outsider is from another department, I also know what this department is doing. So that also facilitates communication between departments. And I can go on and on about the benefits, but I think it's just the social interaction of onboarding taps into different elements of how our brain functions when we play. So we have the group mentality. So if I'm doing something gamified, which a lot of people say, oh, it's uncomfortable because we're doing something silly. If 20 people are doing it, it doesn't seem that silly anymore. So you have this group dynamics working for your benefit as well. And then you have all of these different chemicals released in your brain when you play. So people feel more happy when they play. So they will associate this happiness not with the game that they play, but with your company and with what they're learning. So if they're feeling happy, they also are able to receive information.
I mean, it's making me think about an example that I had with a client that was in this space of transitioning to different roles. And I helped them develop some learning experience connected to a visual representation of their network and of the new network and of some of these components. And I think that you're just reminding me about the way that we set it up for the community connections for exactly those points. In many ways, we used gamification principles when we developed that content for this, Fortune 150 client space. So I've seen that to be true, is what I mean.
Yeah, of course. And it goes on to say, as an example, how easy it is to gamify that activity. So putting on a visual map, either a physical one where people can use their hands to place people within their network, or even a virtual one, is already a gamified element. Because the non-gamified element would be, okay, this is the list of all the people that you have in your network, and then just seeing something that is a standalone document, but you integrating the process and their thinking, and also how creative they can be, is already gamified. So it can be as easy as that, and it has
Yes.
effects of mapping out your connections as well, of course.
It's making me also think about Edward Tufte, who has a lot of books around making data visible. We'll put his links in the episode description, but it's one of those places of inspiration I go to see what are different ways that perhaps making this visible could bring that spirit of both play and accessibility. I think there's something, and maybe this goes back to the idea that there's only so much we can hold in our minds. It's not, meant to hold all the information, but more to be a problem solving muscle. And so, putting it on, some people say the idea of an extended brain, or Tiago Forte says building the second brain. But I think for me, what draws me maybe to visual elements of the learning experience activities I end up building is that it expands that space that we have to work with, to say there's some ideas over here and there's some other concepts over here. When I am developing, some of the work that I'm doing includes course development for a university client. And so we're developing 10 courses that are reimagining their general education curriculum. This is over the course of a couple of years. But as we are mapping a brand new course, I'm using a big Miro template and then moving in different parts, because I'm taking the course learning outcomes and the assessment criteria, and I can't hold that all up here. And in a document, it's too, to me, it's hard to find all that information. I'm mapping it this way. Why am I doing that? Because I think there's a sense of playing in a sandbox and seeing the different ways that things connect. And it gave me ahas in working with my subject matter experts, to say, ooh, what if this assessment practice that we're thinking about became deliberate practice that we did weekly instead of this, big summative assessment at the end? What if we could practice these speaking skills, for example, in our communication class weekly? What would that look like? What would we call it? How would it be integrated? All of that kind of thinking and planning came in that kind of sandbox. And so I know it goes beyond the visual, but there's something about the spatial aspect of play that comes in.
Yeah.
I haven't quite nailed down exactly what that is.
What I can think from what you're saying is to understand how big a process is, and mapping out all the different steps and mapping out all the connections, and then expand your mind. Because maybe, for example, in the idea of onboarding we discussed before, onboarding in the first, let's say, layer of thinking can be, okay, people started on day 1, day 2 they have their induction, day 3 to 5 they're with their team, and that is the process that I have in my mind. But then if I visualize it, or if I put it into a second layer of reflecting, maybe there are more things happening in day 1 and day 2 and day 3 to 5. Maybe day 2 they have the induction, and then they also can have different goals. Like, okay, what are the goals of day 2? What are the goals of day 1? And then you go into a third layer. So how are these days connected? And then the more you are intentional with your thinking, the more opportunities you will find to make these insertions, let's say, to insert the gamified elements in these critical moments. Or you can also say that maybe something that is there shouldn't be there, and maybe it should be in another part of the journey. So I think if people take the time to really take a step back and have a sort of bird's eye view into their processes, into their ways of working, it creates opportunities for a lot more than just inserting play. Play is one example where you can make this process more, let's say, palpable and more smooth. But it can also help to make connections, to create a more intentional way of working, to find these moments that matter for the employees. And then the more you understand it, the more you are able to share it.
As you were sharing that and thinking about the layers and unpacking to find these moments that matter, I think that another piece of gamification, play, and then some of these examples that we've described, one thing that it allows for, and I want to speak specifically to systems level work, because I think that's where the complexity. One thing that this type of work can do is make the implicit explicit. And another example of a client project we're working on is around some of the norms and the things that are often implicit in a specific systems culture that are impacting the end goal that we're after in a change of implementation for some strategies. And so we are building an activity to help make what is the things that are not written down in any process map. We want to bring those to light and put those onto a map so that we can have really important conversations and make some shifts in the area of what I'll call here incentives and motivation to shift this much larger system. And we got to that, the need for that, by really thinking about, this goes to Kathy Moore's process of mapping, starting with, what is it that you want the humans to do that they aren't doing? Right. And then kind of figure out, okay, why is that happening? Get underneath it. Well, we recognize that underneath it, we're saying one thing in this particular system, but something different's happening. Okay, why is that happening? Well, there's some incentives that are cultural, that are moment by moment in this system that we're saying one thing, but then these incentives are pushing people in another direction. And so once you can bring that to light, you can change a system. I think that that's something that has come up for us in this work.
Yeah, of course. And I think that also reveals the power of reflection. And there are different factors that make those implicit things very much implicit in a lot of organizations, because the longer you are in a company, for example, or the longer you spend working on a process, or the longer you spend in a specific manner, that creates a habit. And then sometimes, especially if you're doing it for so long or it works for you, it becomes unconscious habit. And I think it's very difficult to go into our subconscious and then put that back into light. So making the implicit explicit, as you said. But I think also being aware that there are some unconscious habits that we might have, or there's some implicit elements that are just there because if someone puts a light on it, maybe we'll not be able to even explain why they are there. So I think that also it's a beneficial process for a lot of teams and organizations to every once in a while just shake things up, just for the fun of it. Maybe it just leads to, okay, everything is just fine as they are. But maybe sometimes they can produce very interesting conversations like, why are we doing this? And then if nobody can justify why things are being done this way, then okay, just challenge that from its core, work towards something else. And then if things are put in place with intention, then they also create impact. If things are just put there because they work, then it just creates, maybe things are more efficient, but it doesn't create any impact. It doesn't add any value. It just keeps the engine running. So if you want to keep the engine running, the good works. If you want the engine to just fly and produce an even better result, you need to have more intention. You need to add more fuel. And then that fuel can be in the form of play. It can be in the form of challenge and then trying something new. It can be in the form of adding maybe someone's outside perspective, maybe inviting someone to the process of brainstorming who has nothing to do with your team or your process, who can just say, okay, this doesn't make sense to me. And then trying to explain why this implicit thing that we all find useful makes sense. And then if it doesn't make sense to someone outside, imagine if a new employee comes in and then they have to deal with all this implicitness in an organization. And especially for organizations that aim to have long tenure and they want to have people retention, that also creates the effect of, okay, things are solidified in a base. And then when someone new joins in, they usually have a harder time understanding, but everything makes sense to everybody else. But then if you're the only person not understanding, then you will not really ask, right? So you will have this fear of being judged because maybe if everybody else understands, then maybe I'm the problem. But maybe it's not this way. So I think being intentional with also reflection and just looking critically at things every now and then and engaging outside of perspective can really move things to a better direction.
That made me think about another way in which I think perhaps play and gamification can make implicit explicit. There were some recent reels on Instagram. So one of the things she was doing, everything that was on the countertop, she says, let's put this in the garage. Let's put this in the garage, because she wanted her counter to all be clear. And this is something that I actively do in my house. So I was laughing. But I think that humor in memes and reels, like why are some of those funny to us? Because there is some element of either truth or we see ourselves in it. And so play allows that space between that's not really us, but we can see ourselves in it perhaps, which makes it funny, or someone we know. And maybe that's another place that play allows for us.
Yeah, of course, of course. It makes everything more relatable, something that we can feel more connected to, because it's something that it comes a bit more natural. So when we play, we don't think. And that allows for a lot more space to be true to ourselves. Like we have seen so many times. I think also that brings me to a lot of company values that I've seen out there. Be authentic, be your true self, be you. And then I'm asking, okay, if my authentic self is expressed in a specific way, but then it needs to fit the norms of a company, then how do you expect me to be authentic if you don't give me the space to express myself? So I think that also play allows this chance to just throw down our masks, shed all our roles that we hold, the role of a manager, the role of the high achiever, the role of the developer, what people think of us, and just act the way that we're supposed to without fear of judgment, without fear of failure, and just enjoy ourselves. And I think that even the simple concept of just having a good time goes a long way, because then that also tracks down to how productive we are, how happy we are to start our day. It tackles, I think, a lot of different areas like psychology and positive psychology, productivity, company culture. It affects so many areas. But I think the essence is that indeed we are allowed to be ourselves, and we're allowed to laugh at jokes, and we're allowed to just take a break, take a breath, interact with someone, have a conversation without thinking, oh, we're like 5 minutes away from our desk, we need to wrap up this conversation. Which means that we will only keep it at a surface level because it's just chit chat and small talk. So giving people the space, I think that's something that I would really, if I would change one thing about the workplace, that would be it, to give each other more space to interact with each other in a gamified or non-gamified way. It can also be up for discussion, but just having time to interact with our colleagues. If we're expected to work together, to be in project team together, to resolve conflicts together, to bring in new clients and bring in revenue, how are we supposed to do that if we can relate to one another? So, and then one way to relate to one another is to play.
I mean, I'm wondering if some of the recognition of leadership skills like self-awareness and resilience and emotional intelligence will help shift this in the workplace. And I say that because I think I've talked with some guests, and in particular, an episode about authenticity that we'll link in the episode description, but where we were talking about how some leaders will act a certain way because that's how they were led. And so it was hard for them coming up, and they had to work their way up, and it was really challenging. And so they lead without a smile sometimes because that's what they thought they needed to do. So maybe at the root of this question is it better to be feared or loved as a leader. And we can maybe save that for another episode. But I think that my point is I see in the skills that are being highlighted for leaders, a shift happening where it's not only this stand in command, there's a recognition of the power of emotional intelligence and all this. And so I'm wondering if you think that might have an impact on us seeing more openness to play at work as people pursue authenticity, pursue emotional intelligence, and it's thought of as an actual leadership skill now.
Just today I had a training and I was discussing about this. I did this exercise with my participants. We were talking about coaching and how they want to be as a coach. In order to do that, I told them to think about a moment where they felt supported and felt that a safe environment was around them. And what was it about that moment? Who was actively enforcing it? What particular behaviors did they exhibit? And then at the end of this conversation, two interesting things. One is that people found it very difficult to think about a moment where they felt safe and supported, especially in the workplace. So one participant went as far back as when his dad was teaching him how to drive, which I think is interesting on its own. But then the second part of the insights were that people felt safe, but then they never sat with themselves to think, okay, what about it made me safe? And what did this manager or leader or mentor did for me so that it creates that environment? So I went on and tell them that everything that we want to do, I'm a big believer of this theory that everything we want to do in life, we have our knowledge inside. Mm-hmm. And the way to tap into that knowledge is to think in this way. So in this exercise, I told them that, okay, if you're a coach or if you're a leader, in this particular example of a conversation, if you want to be a leader, one of the main things that you would like, I assume that you would like to have, is a safe environment for your team. So if that is your challenge, how to create a safe environment for your team, one strategy you can do is to think, when was the last time you had a safe environment? And then dig deeper into that. Okay, what made it safe? What kind of behaviors did I see around me? Who was leading that safety? Maybe that was something that was unconscious or conscious, but bringing everything into a reflection and then just mapping down these elements. These are your answers to how you can do this for your team. And this, of course, will be at the starting point, because maybe what worked for you might not work for your team, but still is a reference. So I think in essence, leaders have a very difficult task because they have to make the unconscious conscious, or something that was done for them, which was unconscious because they didn't have to do something for them, just experience it. They have to bring it to the forefront and make it conscious and turn that into a strategy. So I think it's very important to, as a leader, to give time for yourself to reflect. And that was also something that we came up as a conclusion with in this training, that we rarely give time for these things. We rarely give time for reflection. But this time that we give for reflection, it can be just 10 minutes at the end of your work week. It can really produce so many results that you could otherwise spend 30 minutes to hours looking for the solution.
Let's go into some of your recommendations and kind of close up our time. But I'd love to hear any book recommendations, any podcasts, whatever of that is relevant to you. We'll link all those in the episode description, like I mentioned. And then I want to hear more about your work. Where can people find you? What type of people are you working with? Any of that.
On my read list is the book of Stuart Brown, which is called Play, I think, How It Shapes Our Brain, and a lot of other things. I cannot think of it right now. And there are 3 books that I have read that made a big impact, not necessarily relating to play, but also in a wider perspective. The first one is How We Learn by Benedict Carey, which taps into how we receive information, how likely we are to keep information, how our brain works when it comes to learning. So that also relates to our openness to experience, and play is also an experience in its own. So I think it helps. The second book is Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Mulch. And this is a very interesting book from a former plastic surgeon turned author, which the most revolutionary idea that have stuck with me after many, many years since I read the book is that the body remembers. So if you start with an intention and you have a goal, then your body will follow. So that also relates to muscle memory and how, again, psychology and the ideas that we have for ourselves and how the ideas that we have for ourselves or others can impact our perceptions. And the last book that I'm reading right now is it's called 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman, inviting us to be more present, to think of time as not as a resource that we just cram things into it, but more just that we are here in this planet for a limited amount of time. I think the average is, again, 4,000 weeks, as the book says. So making the most out of it, but not in a way that we have to just be extra productive, but just enjoying our presence here. I think those would be my book recommendations. For podcasts, I think I don't listen to many, but one late favorite of mine is the Realistic Happiness podcast by Daisy Ilaria. I was also in her podcast before it was renamed. So I'm a big advocate of that as well. And I think I also started by recommendation of a friend, the Learning and Development podcast by David James. Where people can find me, I'm very active on LinkedIn. So you can find my name. I think if I'm not wrong, then there's only one of me. So there's no chance to mix the names with somebody else. Exactly. And I also have my website, teamified.com, which is a play word of teams and gamified. So yeah, people can reach out to me for team building, but also I give trainings on soft skills and how to gamify processes in an organization, like onboarding, goal setting, feedback, and process creation. And the last place that people can find me is on Fiverr. I also have my side business in career coaching. I help people build their resumes, create their cover letters, have interviews, and achieve their career goals. Something that I started a long time ago, but still ongoing. So yeah, I'm in many places. I'm easy to find.
Emy, have you heard the term multi-potentialite?
I have not.
I think you are one.
Okay, I will look into it.
Multi-potentialite is just this, it's having lots of different talents and things that you can do and doing many of those things with excellence. So it is a compliment.
Thank you so much. And here I was thinking I'm a doubler.
Well, thank you so much, Emy, for coming on. It was so wonderful. I wish we had gotten to spend some time in person together at the conference, but at the non-ference, but maybe next time. And I look forward to staying connected. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights about play and gamification. And I look forward to watching the incredible work you're doing and the talks you're sharing. Thank you so much.
Of course, Tracy. It was really nice having this conversation with you. Thank you for having me. And yeah, in the next non-ference, we'll be for sure spending at least a coffee time together.